In saying that the planned downtown Muslim community center should be built somewhere else, Harry Reid cast his lot with his Senate race opponent and Tea Party darling Sharon Angle. He also managed to validate the hysterical warnings of a terror-supporting 13-story mosque in the, quote, shadow of Ground Zero. Ground Zero doesn't have a shadow. The proposal is a community center endorsed by New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg in a spot previously occupied by the haloed Burlington Coat Factory, 2 blocks from the site of the 9/11 attacks. But Harry Reid won't be the last Democrat to cave on this, I promise you. Conservative demagogues and opportunists smell weakness, and they are going to press this advantage. The issue is perfect for Republicans because they are unlikely to actually win. There is no real policy solution. Instead, fearmongers can keep going back to this eternal well of self-victimization again and again until Election Day. Joining me now is Adam Serwer, staff writer for the American Prospect. Adam, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Were you surprised by the restatement today? It came out sort of late in the day. It crossed my desk. I was actually kind of surprised. Were you?
I wasn't surprised because Reid's opponent, Sharon Angle, had already come out earlier in the day against the Ground Zero Mosque. I'm not sure why a Senate candidate in Nevada is weighing in on a land dispute in New York City. But she came out against it, and I think the Reid campaign is really desperate to prevent Angle from gaining any ground on Reid, so they wanted to neutralize a potential wedge issue. But it's sort of amusing because Reid has been attacking Angle for not really understanding the separation of church and state, and here goes Reid, apparently showing everyone he doesn't understand it either.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the lines he was using. For the record, also, I'm really against the new Arby's they're planning in Reno, so just to get on the record with that. But no, I mean, that was one of the lines he was using to kind of position her, I think rightly and accurately, as a very extreme candidate, was a lack of appreciation for the separation of church and state, and he now has put himself in this box, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think it's probably what's most disconcerting for Democrats is you don't really get much more of a fat down the middle pitch than defending the First Amendment. It's the First Amendment. Everybody loves the First Amendment. And if Democrats can't stand up for something that is a fundamental constitutional value, I think that says a lot about where the Democrats are as a party in terms of political courage. I mean, Americans aren't going to side with a weak party that doesn't stand up for principle, especially when the principle is so glaringly obvious.
Yeah, and the problem here, right, is that the polling is, I mean, the polling's a little confusing, right, because the polling shows that people have these two sort of conflicting views. They support the First Amendment by large majorities, but there's also a very significant plurality majority of voters who don't, quote, support the building of the mosque. And with respect to that, you have President Obama coming out, with his statement on Friday night. You wrote a bit on your blog about whether you thought that helps or hurts Democrats politically. What is your sort of feeling about him choosing to enter the fray on the issue?
Well, I think it was the right thing to do for the president, but it shouldn't have gotten to that point. I mean, the reason why the president had to weigh in is because all the New York Democrats, with the exception of Gerald Nadler, had been really silent on the issue and hadn't taken strong stances. Ideally, this would have been handled by local Democrats, but It wasn't. So it got to the point where the President of the United States, who is the president for all Americans, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whatever, has to stand up and say, look, we're not going to give rights to this group of people and deny them to this group of people. That's not how the United States works. And I think that's fundamentally what Republicans wanted, right? I mean, what they wanted, what this has been about from the beginning, is trying to force Democrats into a position where they would have to defend an unpopular group of people. Americans are very anxious about Muslims. I think something like 40% of Americans admit that they have some feelings of intolerance towards Muslims. So this is a transparently political maneuver. The problem is that the Democrats could have stood on principle. They could have said something like, look, Republicans want to tell you where you can build your churches, your synagogues, and your mosques, and we're saying, no, the government can't tell you that. And they could have made a stand on principle and actually reversed this issue, but instead they waited until the last minute, and now the issue has been defined by the opposition.
Yeah, and I think it's really an important point that Kristen Gillibrand, is senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, Anthony Weiner, I mean, these have been profiles in cowardice on this issue. And that had they stepped into the breach, I think you're right, it probably would have gotten the White House. In terms of the White House, I also wonder to the degree you think there is a foreign policy aspect to this. I mean, I was going through Al Jazeera, both Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English, and this is getting play, understandably. And, you know, the world is watching this sort of thing. And I wonder how much you think there's a foreign policy implication that weighed into the president's decision in terms of coming out and making the statement on Friday.
Well, I think there are foreign policy implications, but I think what's ironic is that prior to this happening, the Arab world the Arab and Muslim world is actually very disappointed with President Obama. They feel like he hasn't met up with the expectations set in his Cairo speech, which is really ironic because here Republicans portray the president as being too sympathetic to Muslims, where most Muslims abroad don't actually see it that way. But I do think it's actually very problematic when you're talking. I mean, it's certainly not sustainable as a governing philosophy, right? I mean, one of the most remarkable things about this is that it's a break from the Bush administration, which did its best to marginalize extremists rather than allowing them to be able to claim the legitimacy of the entire religion of Islam, to which 1.5 billion people in the world adhere to. And Republicans at this point are saying, no, we don't just want a war with al-Qaeda, we want a war with Islam. And that's actually not something that can happen or is in the interest of the United States.
Yeah. Geostrategically, I don't think that's a good bet. Morally, obviously, bankrupt as well. Adam Serwer, you could read his work at theprospect.org. He writes for the American Prospect. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.